We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Legal Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, April 26, 2023, and it is 8:30 a.m. First item on the agenda is roll call to determine quorum. Catherine, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Fastinos?
Present.
Ms. Gustafson?
Here.
Ms. Aldine?
Here.
Mr. Hicks? Mr. Rice? Ms. Williamson?
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Now just a few housekeeping rules. If you're observing this meeting remotely, it's at trpa.gov under the calendar header, and then click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for April 26th. To address the committee members directly with your comments, please raise your hand in Zoom or by dialing *9 on your phone. Do we have any remote committee members this morning? It didn't look like it. Thank you. Okay, if you've joined us in person, members of the public, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment and you will be called on to speak. Next, let's move on to approval of the agenda. John, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
Thank you. We'll deem the agenda approved as posted then. Next, let's move on to approval of the minutes. We're on agenda item 2. We have a set of minutes from March 22nd, 2023 on page 7 of your packets. Does any member of the committee wish to make a change? Okay.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the agenda the minutes as posted.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone object? Motion passes. Next, we're going to move on to agenda item 3, but I believe it's 3 and 4. Am I correct? 3 and 4 that we're going to at least talk about together and then we'll vote on separately?
We'll take them together and then act on them separately since they have to do with the same location.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll introduce agenda items 3 and 4, but we will be looking for separate votes. Agenda item 3 is a recommendation regarding resolution of enforcement action for Mike Zanatel, unauthorized watercraft launching, 1141 Fallen Leaf Road, El Dorado County, California, assessor's parcel number 021-251-014, TRPA file number code 2023-0026. And then we're also going to talk about agenda item 4, which is recommendation regarding resolution of enforcement action, Andrew and Katie Gray, unauthorized watercraft launching, 1141 Fallen Leaf Road, El Dorado County, California, assessor parcel number 021-251-014, TRPA file number code 2023-0027. At this point, if I could please pass it to Steve Sweet to present on these items.
Thank you. Steve Sweet, Co-Compliance Manager. As you said, we're going to do resolution of enforcement action with Mike Zanatel and the resolution of enforcement action with Andrew and Katie Gray together. Both violations involve the unauthorized launching of watercraft without the required inspections over private property. The violations occurred on Fallen Leaf Lake, on Fallen Leaf lakefront property located at 1141 Fallen Leaf Lake Road in El Dorado County. As you can see from the slide, it's on the south shore of Fallen Leaf Lake. The next slide, go ahead, please. And this is a site plan of the property, and you can see down on the left side by the pier is the area that we'll be discussing where the launching occurred. A brief description: in September 2022, TRPA staff responded to a complaint of unauthorized watercraft launching on the Gray property located on the south shore of Fallen Leaf Lake. During this inspection, TRPA staff spoke with Katie Gray and discovered that they had launched their watercraft over the Gray property without any authorization or required launch inspections. Through further discussion with the Grays, staff also learned that Zanatel also launched his watercraft over the Gray property, again without any required launch inspections. Both watercraft had been in Fallen Leaf Lake over the summer of 2022 until removed at the boat ramp at the end of the season. And can you go to next slide, please? This is a photo of the area where the launching occurred. As you can see, right next to the boat ramp, there was a path. If you could see in the site plan, you could see a path going down from the house down to the lake or down to the pier, but there's no actual launch ramp. Next slide, please. And a close-up photo, you can see that this is just typical beach area of that shore of Fallen Leaf Lake. And there's no evidence of any launch ramp being there in the past. So the launching of the motorized watercraft without an AIS inspection is a risk to Fallen Leaf Lake and occurred in violation of TRPA code section. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. TRPA code section 63.4.1 prohibiting the launching or attempting to launch of any motorized watercraft into the waters of Lake Tahoe without an AIS inspection by TRPA or its designee. And then TRPA code section 83.2, which is an activity that is not specifically exempt and would require a permit. Xanatel is currently working on a TRPA permitted construction project on the Gray property and should be familiar with the approved plans, which do not include any launching facility for motorized watercraft. Gray and Xanatel are taking full responsibility for the unauthorized activities and have both agreed to a settlement. And I will go through the settlement separately so we could take action on each one. Next slide, please. So Xanatel staff is recommending that Xanatel pay a penalty of $4,000 TRPA. And then do we want to take action on that one before I give the recommendation for?
Okay, so I would like to ask, is Mr. Xanatel present? Either-
Mr. Xanatel could not make it today. But his wife, I believe, is online
Okay,
on the phone.
Ms. Xanatel or Mr. Xanatel's wife, if you can hear me, if you wanted to make a statement now, and Catherine, I don't know what we need to do to unmute. Thank you.
I'm unmuted, and I think everything that we had to say were in the letters that my husband has written and submitted already. The circumstances, because we truly love that lake. And there were circumstances, but I'm sure that's all been taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee members, questions or comments? Ms. Aldine?
So Steve, I'm a little confused. I mean,
Mhm.
Mr. Xanatel's explanation for why he didn't launch at the marina had to do with his concern that hot water from possible decontamination would damage his boat. My understanding is the boat had not been anywhere other than Fallen Leaf Lake, right?
Yes, and when he took the boat out the previous year, he wasn't able to get it sealed, so it required a new inspection.
But not necessarily decontamination if he hadn't taken it to another lake.
That would be up to the inspection. you
Right,
know.
right. But the likelihood of it, harboring some AIS is probably pretty remote if it had simply been in storage. I'm just wondering about this misconception that using hot water is somehow going to damage the hull of the boat or the engine. Can you address that? I mean, why would that be a concern? I'm just curious.
I am too.
I actually asked Dennis to come to answer, to speak to that question.
Good morning, Dennis Baglow, Aquatic Invasive Species Program Manager for TRPA. Hot water has been used for decontamination since we started the program in 2008. We worked very closely with the boat industry to determine what is an appropriate level for hot water that not only protects the boat, but also protects the lake. So 120 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit is what is appropriate to kill any species that we're concerned about, and also what the boat industry is satisfactory with temperature wise. They've done lifetime tests on pumps and various aspects of boat components that demonstrate that it's not a problem for watercraft.
So Dennis, if this was a legitimate concern, I'm wondering if we can maybe include in the literature some sort of statement, that this has been, it's tried and true, it's been tested. There's no concern about this, damage associated with the 140-degree water that's used to decontaminate. It just may be something that we can add to our literature so people are less concerned about the possibility of damaging their boat.
Certainly.
Okay.
There are cases where damage has occurred to boats, but not as a result of the decontamination. It's usually a circumstance where the boater has not taken the good care of their boats, like changing your oil. There's a component called the impeller. It's what moves the water, and that needs to be changed fairly frequently.
Right.
And that can oftentimes be old, and that can be a result of some damage that is perceived, but it would happen regardless. So
Right.
if it didn't happen during an inspection, it would have happened on the water.
Okay. Yeah, no, obviously, it can happen as a result of benign neglect of the boat by the owner. I don't think we've had any instances when the actual decontamination has caused any problems with the boats, the hull, the engines.
There's very rare circumstances
Okay.
where equipment may have had a malfunction, but I mean, it's in the single digits over 15 years.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other committee member comments? I do see Ms. Zanatel wanted to make one more statement, which we can go ahead and allow. Ms. Zanatel, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just, of course, I wasn't there when all this took place. I cannot speak to that but my husband's letters could. I am curious this is the first I've heard of that Mike was concerned about the hot water damaging his boat. Since we used our boat to train the people at the Fallen Leaf Marina on how to do all this. So I know my husband was not anti-cleaning his boat unless I just misunderstood what just happened. And that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from committee members? Okay, let's go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the governing board on this agenda item, please raise your hand on your Zoom screen or dial *9 on your phone. And Catherine, can you let me know, please?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to comment on this item.
Okay, thank you. And if I don't hear any other questions or comments from committee members, I am ready to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of this settlement agreement for Zanatel.
Thank you. We have a motion. Any discussion? Hearing none. Catherine, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Mr. Hicks, Ms. Williamson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you very much. That brings us back to agenda item 4. Mr. Sweet, was there anything you wanted to add? Otherwise, I will ask if Andrew or Katie Gray or the representative wanted to speak. Oh, thank you. The settlement. Thank you.
Yep. Just the staff recommendation for the Grays violation is to pay a $4,000 penalty and to block off the access to the launching area.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sweet. Andrew Gray, Katie Gray, or representative, Mr. Feldman?
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members, Lou Feldman on behalf of the Grays. I think this has already been observed. These are really well-intentioned folks that, have not taken their boat someplace else and posed a risk to Fallen Leaf Lake. They simply didn't know better. And we've worked with Mr. Sweet, as we often do, and are in support of the resolution. Be happy to answer any questions should you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feldman. Ms. Aldine? Please.
Steve, there's a reference to the launching of watercraft or the creation of a launching area on the Gray property requires TRPA review. I don't think there's anything in the settlement agreement itself that requires the blocking off of the launching area. Should that be included? Or is it sufficient to simply include it in this action by the legal committee? Well, maybe it is. It says all launching of motorized watercraft must occur at an approved launch facility with authorized AIS inspections. Once your watercraft is removed from the lake, the boat must be inspected at an aquatic invasive species station to obtain the proper seal attached to the motor and launched at the appropriate launch facility. And then there's that last mention of the fact that any launching from this area requires TRPA review.
Shelley, if you
Yeah.
look at page 59 of the packet,
Uh-huh.
item number 2.
Oh, okay, all right, sorry, I overlooked that. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. My error.
Any other committee committee member questions or comments? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to public comment then. Members of the public, if you want to comment on this item, please raise your hand on Zoom or dial *9. And Catherine, please let me know.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to comment on this item.
Thank you. With that, if we don't have any other committee member comments or questions, I'm willing to entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move to recommend approval of the Gray Settlement Agreement.
Thank you. We have a motion. Any discussion? Hearing none. Catherine, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Mr. Hicks, Ms. Williamson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you very much. That moves us on to agenda item 5, which is the recommendation regarding resolution of enforcement action. Natalie, and I hope I say this right, Buccini and Thomas Peabody and Jacob Buccini, unauthorized tree removal, 1540 Cherry Hills, El Dorado County, California, assessors parcel number 033-292-011, TRPA file number code 2022-0092. If Mr. Sweet, looks like you're up again for presentation, please. This is on page 61 of your packets.
Thank you. Again, resolution of enforcement action with Natalie Buccini, Tom Peabody, and Jacob Buccini. Natalie and Tom are husband and wife, and Jacob is their son, who is the contractor for the site. Consent calendar item 3, page 61 of your packet. This violation involves unauthorized tree removal of 6 trees on a single-family dwelling construction project. The violations all occurred on the Buccini Peabody property located at 1540 Cherry Hills, El Dorado County. There's a overview of the site. It's just south it's off of Elks Point or Elks Club, just south of the airport there. Next slide, please. Close up of the property, and you can see it's pretty heavily treed prior to any construction projects there. A quick description of the violation. TRPA staff in October 2022, TRPA staff responded to a complaint of unauthorized tree cutting at the Buccini Peabody property. During that inspection, TRPA staff discovered that several trees larger than 14 inches DBH had been removed that were not authorized on the approved plans. If you go to the next slide, please. Here's a couple photos of the property after construction, and you can see all the trees have been removed from the property. Next slide, please. Here's the other side of the property. There were a couple trees left in the very back corner of the property. After further investigation and a discussion with El Dorado County Building Department and the settling parties, TRPA staff determined that El Dorado County had given clear direction at the time of the pre-grade, and that 6 trees between the sizes of 15 to 26 inches DBH were removed without any authorization from TRPA or El Dorado County. If you go to the next slide, please. Here's a copy of the site plan that Jacob Buccini was using out there when we met him. And you can see that actually none of the trees were marked by TRPA. The black X's that you find or that you see were marks that he must have put on the plans. The TRPA version does not have the black marks on there, on the crosses on it. But I wanted to show you what the symbols look like because there was a confusion. He was confused that the markings for the actual trees showed that they were to be removed. But we did not feel that these type of symbols show an actual X across the tree, which would be on any other plans. When you're going to have the trees removed, there would actually be a big X across it. And then what else? Yeah, so I just wanted to show you those symbols and why we didn't feel. Also, at the time of pre-grade, we felt that the county actually made it clear which trees should be removed because there was some, there was some discussion about that. And he allowed all the trees within the footprint of the house to be removed, but told them that any other trees outside of that, besides the two trees in the front, he did allow to be removed, which unfortunately I can't point to those because I don't have my computer in front of me. But he did allow 2 additional trees to be removed at the time of pre-grade, but told Jacob that any other trees would need to be permitted by TRPA. And we would typically not mark all those trees around the outside of the property through the permitting of a single family dwelling. Those would typically be removed by our forester, approved by our forester. So the removal of these 6 trees occurred in violation of TRPA code 61.1.5, requiring TRPA approval for removal of all trees greater than 14 inches. And again, TRPA code section 2.32, which is the tree removal is not an exempt activity and would require a TRPA permit. The settling parties have taken full responsibilities for the unauthorized activities and have agreed to a settlement where they will plant 6 mature 10 to 15 foot native conifers in TRPA approved locations and pay a penalty of $24,000 to TRPA. Staff is recommending that the governing board approve the proposed settlement agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Sweet. Ms. Did you have a question?
Question, Steve, on in the settlement agreement under paragraph 2, and this has to do with the specifics of the settlement. It says a tree permit will be required for the removal of any of the 6 trees, these are replacement trees, no matter the size of the trees or its condition. I mean, if the tree is dead, TRPA still wants the right to inspect the tree to confirm that it's no longer viable. So it's not just the size, it's the condition, right?
Yeah. Trees die within a certain. If the trees die within a certain amount of time, they have to replace those
Right,
within the 5 years. So
right.
we, because sometimes it's been confusing in the past where if I didn't put that in there, a new owner or they feel that they could take those out under the normal rules. But I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure that, until they're 14 inches,
Right.
there's some protection on those trees.
Okay, I'm just wondering if it would be prudent to say or condition so that if it dies, they don't go ahead and remove it if it's over 14 inches without an inspection being made by the TRPA forester. It doesn't matter. The settlement agreement's been signed. I'm not suggesting that you amend it, Steve, but maybe in the
Okay.
future,
Yeah,
including condition would be advisable too.
okay.
Yeah. What's curious about this is, I mean, the trees that were removed, this is not a lakefront property, doesn't appear to be interfering with any view corridor. It's not interfering with the development of the house, right? Or the development of any of the improvements. It's odd that those trees would have been removed because there was no logical reason for them to be taken down.
Yes, I felt similar.
Yeah, sometimes there's motivation for gain sunlight or open up a little bit, but I think generally who knows exactly what was the motivation.
Yeah,
for
interesting.
tree
Okay.
cutting.
Okay.
Thank you. I did want to make sure if Natalie Buccini, Thomas Peabody, or Jacob Buccini were on, Catherine, if they wanted to make a comment.
Looks like Natalie Buccini has their hand up. Natalie, go ahead.
Good morning. I would just like to address a couple of the comments I heard. The question about why the trees were removed is more about a confusion that existed when the pre-grade 1 was completed. We passed the pre-grade 1 inspection and my son Jacob was there with the inspector, Chris. And Jacob had marked all the trees that he thought were to be removed according to the plans from the El Dorado County. The approved set of plans, however, did not contain a tree page the way that they were supposed to have in there for him to better designate which trees were to be removed. And I don't know to this day why the tree page was not included for Jacob, but he was going with the approved set of plans and trying to determine which trees were marked for removal. And in doing so, he put a ribbon around each of the trees. And at the pre-grade 1 inspection with Chris, they walked the property together. They called the architect, and it was Jacob's understanding that the trees he marked were approved to be removed. So that's one concern. And the other concern of mine was that the trees that were removed were more out of a concern for to protect the space around the house, not necessarily just the footprint, but where there would be decks that go out from the footprint, and the property right next door to our property is completely heavily treed. And we were worried about the fires and things like that. So that is why, you know, we would remove trees that were outside of the footprint.
Thank you, Ms. Buccini. Do I have any other committee member questions or comments at this point? Ms. Gustafson?
You know, my question is relative to all these settlements on trees. I'm used to hearing about the root ball size, you know, versus necessarily just the height. And just for future, do we ever consider that, you know, whether it's a 24-inch box or a
For replacement trees?
yeah,
or-
for replacement trees, because you can have a certain height, but if you don't have a certain root ball mass, less likely to survive. Now you're venturing into things I know about. So
I think generally we've been using height ever
Mhm.
since I've been here, but if we can look at,
You
a
might look at a
better
combination just to
height.
ensure, I think with Shelley, that it is, you know, survives and that it isn't kind of root bound in a challenged way, but
Yeah. good point.
I've used height because I correlate that with the size of the root ball and everything.
Right.
And what size tree we would
Yeah.
want.
and it usually follows, but it can sometimes be misleading.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll take that into
Yeah.
consideration. for
if
future
it
ones.
works, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, let's go to public comment. You can either raise your hand on your Zoom screen or dial *9. And Catherine, if you could please let me know if we have anyone.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to comment on this item.
Thank you. And unless there are other questions or comments from the committee, I would love to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of this settlement agreement, Buccini and Peabody.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, Catherine, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Falcinos,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Mr. Hicks, Ms. Williamson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. That moves us on to agenda item 6, which is a potential closed session with counsel to discuss existing and potential litigation. Mr. Marshall, do we need to go into closed session?
We do not.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on then to agenda item. We don't need agenda item 7 then either. Potential direction on things coming out of agenda item 6. So let's move on to agenda item 8, which is committee member comments. Any comments from the committee? Okay. Agenda item 9 then is our public interest comment section. This is the final item of this morning's meeting. If any member of the public wishes to speak at this time, please raise your hand either on Zoom or by dialing *9, or if you're in person, please come on up to the podium and you can address the committee.
Madam Chair, we have no hands raised to comment on this item.
All right. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned.